Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab. I am so glad to have you back today. And if you're new here, welcome. I do lots of DIYs, trash to treasure, furniture flips with my husband Chris, and thrifting adventures for a farmhouse. So in today's video, I am going to bring you 3 trash to treasures. So these are 3 thrifted items that I had gotten. And when I picked them up, I didn't think they needed too much work. The little stool, I knew that I wanted to reupholster it. I like to reupholster in drop cloth fabric and do kind of like a grain sack or burlap bag, coffee bag, just to give it that farmhouse feel. And then I super love this little magazine rack. It has some cute scallops on it, and I knew when I distressed that it was super cute, would be super cute. Little did I know that, you know, had needy spots on it. I guess there's always a reason why people donate them, I find out when you're thrifting items. And then I had picked up this, what I considered a very cute shelf, which turned out to be very, very needy, but after it was all said and done, I was very happy with it. So sometimes when you're doing thrifted items, don't just think that you're getting just to paint them and resell them, because that's what I do. You just know that there's a reason that you're thrifting them. That's the reason why they're donated, is that something's wrong with them, something's broken, something's not quite right. And so I guess it's the challenge and the love of flipping, of finding and restoring an item to resell. So this is the first of my trash to treasures, this cute little yellow stool, but I didn't really think that went in with the farmhouse decor, but for $2.09 I didn't pass it up. So the first thing I had to do was remove all those staples to take the yellow pleather off. So using my staple remover tool and then some needle nose pliers to get it in there, I got it removed. I have to say this was a pretty little tight fit. I usually don't use my foam, but since this had a top on it that nothing could get through, I decided that I would just reuse it and cover it. So after getting that removed, I needed to clean it with some Crud Color just to make sure that any residue that might have been left behind on that wood is off before painting. So because I like to distress my pieces, I'm using an undercoat of black, and I use the black onyx, and I will put it in the description below. So the bottom of this is like a plywood that's kind of raw, so it accepted the paint real well, but I did have to do 2 coats of black on the legs. So after getting it completely dried, after the 2 coats of black, I'm going in with my Paint and Primer Kills in 1 in my flat white, which will be in the description also, and giving it its coats. And I think I did about 3 coats to cover. So then after my paint has completely dried, I go in with my 220 sandpaper to give it a nice distressing. So I'm just going to re-stick that foam using some Loctite spray adhesive. So for the batting, to make this not have sharp edges, I have thrifted this polyfill fleece, so I'm going to use that for this project. Then I cut off as much as I thought that I would needed to use. You don't want to cut too short though, it's easier to cut more off and try to put some on. And then I'm just using my electric staple gun to staple it on and try not to bunch it up. And then I'm just cutting the excess off. So then I guesstimated on how much I needed for that drop cloth fabric, and I wanted to leave that little seam as a detail in this cute little stool. So I wanted to make sure that I had enough on both sides and that I could keep it even. And then I kind of just took off the corners of my square so it was rounded. So the first 2 staples I'm going to put in is to make sure that my seam will stay straight. So I'm going to staple one down on the one side and then turn the stool around and staple on the other side, making sure that it's straight and level. So now I'm just stapling around the rest of the chair, just working myself around, trying to not bunch it up in one place so it's nice and smooth. And then now at this point I can cut the excess fabric off. So of course I'm going to stencil on this. So I came up with a cute little royal coffee bean on my silhouette. I had gotten the idea, similar idea, on Pinterest. So then I just took two different, a different font, and then the design with the little crown on it, and then I just put the royal coffee bean inside the little swirlies and crown and cut out and used it as a stencil. So then I measured out on my little stool where a square was, since this is round, and then cut the image in the size of, in the middle of that on freezer paper, and then used transfer tape to keep it nice and straight because of the lines on the transfer tape. And then I needed to use an iron to release the freezer paper from the transfer tape, and you need to put a towel on top of this because the freezer or the transfer tape will melt. And then after removing the transfer tape, I just went back in with the hot iron, no steam, and just kind of pressed down that freezer paper, glossy side down, I'm sorry. So that's the side that kind of melts onto the fabric and makes a nice tight stencil. So now I'm going to be using my Apple Barrel multi-use paint in black that I get at Walmart, and a makeup sponge that I get at the Dollar Tree. And I do the kind of the dabbing technique where, you know, there's not a lot of paint on the makeup sponge and you kind of just bounce, tap lightly. You don't want to smush it that it goes underneath the stencil, but the fabric, the linen cloth takes the paint pretty well, so I only have to do one coat. Then I let the paint completely dry before removing the stencil. And then to bond the paint in with the fabric, I'm just taking a hot cloth because I'm kind of out of parchment paper right now, and just to run it over the paint, and that makes it nice and smooth instead of, you can feel the difference from it being hard paint to smoothing with the fabric. And then I just seal it in with some Scotchgard because I like to seal any of my upholstery jobs with Scotchgard. So my next trash to treasure is this cute little scalloped magazine rack. You know, when you're thrifting and you're picking it up, you're trying to grab it real quick before somebody else gets it, you know. Well, at my store anyway, you can turn around and it can be gone. But you never know how needy it is until you actually start working. So all these little brads needed to be tightened back down with a hammer. So here I'm just cleaning it off with my crud cutter to make sure that I have a good surface to paint on. So here's where you can see that they put the screws in and then they had chipped the paint. So I'm going to spackle that in because even though I like distressing, I don't like damage. And so this piece here was about ready to fall off, so I just used some of my husband's CA glue and the instant dryer to tighten it right back up so it was permanently on there. So then I needed to sand smooth where I had spackled. I like that spackling. As you can see, it was pink before and now it's white, so I know it's ready to be sanded. So I did give this magazine rack 3 coats of shellac, but I did not film it because I had to take it outside. But now after that has dried, now I'm on to painting it with my Kilz paint and primer in flat white. And I shellacked it because I could tell the age of the wood when it was had the spackle on it. It was starting to turn yellow, so I know it was going to bleed through the white. So I gave this a total of 3 coats of white, and I know magazine racks inside is kind of a pain, but you want to take your time because you don't want to have to sand drips. So I was so excited to get to distress this piece because I knew that scalloped detail was going to distress so pretty. And then to seal it off, I used my finishing paste just to give that nice smooth feeling and just seal that paint in nice. Even though you don't have to, I just like this added touch. So my next trash to treasure is this shelf. And boy, this is probably the neediest out of all 3 of these projects. You could tell it was a kit piece. It had lots of screw holes that I wanted to fill in. Somebody had painted around it. That railing on the top was loose and was going to have to be re-glued, taken off and re-glued. And it was a not very nice paint job that somebody had done on it, as you could see. And then it had those rusted hangers, and then it had where they'd screwed it into the wall. So this was definitely a much more needy piece. So first I'm going to remove these hangers that are not needed because I'm going to have my husband put a piece of beadboard so it's a nice and secure piece, and it just gives it a little bit more upscale from being a kit piece. And now that I have those removed, you could tell by that top it needed a good crud cutter bath, so I'm going to give it a good cleaning before I even start to spackle it. So if this piece wasn't needy enough, one of these little hangers was loose, so I was trying to screw it in, but then I ended up taking it off and wood gluing it on when I took it out to the garage. That way it was nice and secure and you didn't have to worry about it being wobbly. So now I'm going to spackle over all those screw holes. I don't want this to look like a kit piece. I think it can be a nice piece, but when you know that it's been screwed together like that, I just think it looks better, especially if you're going to paint over it, to fill in those. And then I could tell that somebody had tried to fix this railing with some super glue, so it really needed some good wood glue, and I needed to scrape off that super glue and then clamp it on one side and then clamp it on, let that dry, then clamp it on the other side. So I just put some wood glue on a little Kleenex and just kind of dabbed it in there, and I did kind of have to use a hammer so they were nice and tight. And then when removing that, the corner piece had come apart, so my husband has a corner clamp that came in very handy for this project. So here's where you can see it all clamped up and set overnight until that glue dries. So then my husband cut a piece of beadboard and routed the edges so they were nice and smooth, and then I did have to go back in with some more spackling and anywhere there were gaps before I started to paint this. But right here I'm on to my first coat of black, as I like to distress, and I think the coats give this a nice paint job. So then after I painted my 2 coats of black, I was on to paint my white, and I like the Kilz paint and primer like I said earlier in the video. And then I gave it about 2 to 3 coats, and I tried to not have too much on my paintbrush when I was doing this, because there's a lot of little crevices and a lot of angles to get at, and with those little spindles and the little knobbies, you don't want to have a whole bunch of paint build up, so when you go to sand that it's not so much fun to sand. So then after 3 coats of white, I was on to sanding it. There was a lot of sanding, a lot of angles to do, and I actually have a brand new piece of 220, just because of all the angles, it just kind of the paint did kind of build up on the angles a little bit, no matter how hard I tried. And then to finish this piece up, I'm just taking that Minwax finishing paste again. And I did do that on this stool at the beginning also. I do it on all of my painted pieces. We just like the smell and how it leaves a nice smooth feeling on our painted pieces. So when you thrift furniture, little items like this, you just never know what you're going to get yourself into. It's a quick grab at that thrift store before somebody else gets it. So the little stool was probably the least needy of all of these 3 projects, and it actually needed a little repostering job, but I love what I do, and I love redoing all these pieces. And I know when I picked up this magazine rack, I thought, oh wow, all this needs was painted, but you never know until you actually get right into it what it's going to need. And I know it was missing a couple pieces of the scallops, but I think it just gives it a nice detailing. And then the same with this shelf. I knew it needed a little bit of work, but boy, it turned into need a lot of work. So you just, like I said, you just never know what you're going to get into when you're thrifting, and I'm always happy when all I have to do to an item is paint it. Would you have left these at the thrift store, or would you have just set them to the side and not redone any of this, or would you have taken on to the challenge? And which one of these pieces was your favorite? So I thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope you enjoyed this kind of content. And remember in the comments to tell me which one was your favorite, and would you have picked these items up, or would you have passed on them and redonated them, or just passed on them all together. I thank you again so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so. Thanks so much.